The Doug Rising Show. Well, the Doug Rising Show. Well, the Doug Rising Show. And I'm the race. Oh, yeah, shut up. Good morning. Doug Rice. Hey, don't drop your phones. It's me. You're not alone. How you doing, folks? Let's get on with the jokes. Oh, my goodness. Are we still waiting for an invasion? What the hell? What? How long is 24 hours? Listen. If they had actually given the Palestinians the time to leave, juxtaposed to the 24-hour period of time they told them they had to leave before going in, let me tell you something, nobody would have died. It would have been an orderly exit. I mean, can you imagine if not a single shot was fired between the time the Israeli government told the Palestinians they had 24 hours to leave and today? And they still ain't got on their way. Boy, somebody seem like they afraid. Okay, you heard what I said. What? Don't get in your Israeli feelings. I am not a Palestinian fan. If we Negroes just did a little digging, we'd understand they're on our land. You know what I'm saying? And no, I ain't playing. Not today. 7:02 in the morning. Let's get on the way. Thank you for showing up, tuning in. This is the Doug Rice Show. This is what I do. This is me, just so you know. I've been doing this since January 6th, 2021. And I ain't gonna do this shit. I'm not gonna stop doing this shit until this shit's done. And I mean that. I actually gave thought to stopping. The show I actually considered dropping. And then I just said, nah, that's all right. Let me see how this shit goes. And so this is the Doug Rice Show. Thank you for showing up. It's 7:03 in the morning. I do a little intro, try to entertain you. You know, but primarily what I do is I read. I fulfill the Negro need for information and dissemination throughout the Negro nation. And the reason I do that, folks, there is a twofold reason, a double-edged sword, if you will, you could, and you shall. Not only do I expect you to get that goddamned grin off your faces, I also expect you to read. I want you to read books. You need to read as much as they keep from us and such, and thus we're off the bus. It is done. They are on the run. And I, for one, I want to learn a ton. And today, that is exactly what we have coming. The Invention of the Jewish People by Shlomo Sand. Oh my goodness, is this read gonna be grand? Now, yesterday's offer I was not happy with. I was not happy with yesterday's show. No, let me express this so you know. You know, the content I do not read beforehand. I might have to change that a little bit, you know? Because yesterday they kind of started reading into their own beliefs about themselves, and I believe that the show went a little to the left. And for that show, I feel slightly bereft. But I'm over it, and I'm here. And now we got the invention of the Jewish people drawing near. Now look, don't get in your feelings about the title. This is just a reading recital. I'm sorry, that was good. I liked it anyway. Be sure to hit the like, subscribe, the share button, hit the notification bell. As we know, the notification bell can go to hell because it don't work so well. But today, as you can see, you're going to have a lot to say. This is by Shlomo Sand. It is by its own admission an international bestseller. Oh my goodness. What a fine writing fellow. The Invention of the Jewish People. That's the name of the book. And that's not an accusation as we're going to look, but it is a statement, isn't it? All right, it's not one of beratement. It is a statement of fact. We're going to investigate this this publication, available from Amazon, which is where I obtained it. This is now, I understand this is a PDF that I have, but you would do well to simply go purchase this. It's extremely inexpensive in Amazon. Thank you so much. Oh, let me tell you again, folks, we do have a sponsor. The sponsor is Twidwear, and I'm gonna let you see it right there. Go to twidwear.com for some fine apparel, and you'll find it at twidwear.com right there. All right, well, I just want to get that in there. Also, we'll be doing a spot on Mr. Twid. And as well, Twidwear will be showing up at a point in time. You guys got to hear this guy. He's a businessman through and through. Very serious individual. And so I like to have that kind of vibe on the show, especially if it brings me some residual. Oh, just stop. I'm okay. Thanks for tuning in. All right, so Shlomo Sand. There are 5 chapters in this book. 5 chapters. Let's take a look. Now, I'm not going to be able to read through all of the chapters, indeed, but they're very long. But we're going to go over chapter 3. Chapter 3, as you can see, if you can't, then here, let me give you a little bit of... There we go. Can you see chapter 3 now? I bet you can. The Invention of the Exile, Proselytism and Conversion. We're going to read through this without any coercion. Nobody's going to interrupt us, okay? Such and does. All right, anyway. The Invention of the Exile. Why is this pertinent, the Invention of the Exile? Let's stand right here and miserate for a while. I'll tell you. The fight, all of the fight that you see going on, if you're not looking at the news, you need to get on, get out. If you don't look at the news, I don't even want you here because you're not going to be able to connect these mental dots. This is some, this isn't just a little, this is a lot. All right. And what we're about to cover, the Invention of the Exile, Proselytism and Conversion, has so much to do with what's happening over there. I mean, you can't excuse what's happening. The offset, the off balance, the response in kind to what started is now just, I think, driving Israelis out of their minds. They are bombing indiscriminately. And let me say, just yesterday, they had 700 deaths. 700 deaths. They're over 2,000, nearly 2,500 or near children. And I'm to understand that Palestinians went in there high on drugs. And let me correct that. Hamas, not the Palestinians, some group that has tunnels that look amazing. Got to tell you. They came in and brought this upon people. And I don't think the Israelis are too discriminate on who gets killed as a result. Now, you can understand both sides, but we'll get into it later, folks. They're never going to get into the details. They're never going to get into the weeds. Oh, no, because see, then a lot of correction has to happen and fulfill a lot of needs. So we're not going to go there now, but we are going to check out The third chapter, which I think is what we're after. How did they get there? You know, I found that to be an extremely fascinating topic. Who are they? How did they get there? You know, the chapters are extremely long, as you can see. I'm trying to get there right now, but leave it to me. Oh, chapter 2. Lord have mercy. There's a lot to go through. So how did they get where they're getting? And why is their presence so upsetting? We're going to see. Yes, we are, as soon as I get to, boom, chapter 3. All right, here we go. Chapter 3 of this book, The Invention of the Jewish People. We're going to take a look by Shlomo Sand. And we're going to see where all of this lands. Here we go. Chapter 3, The Invention of the Exile. I think this might be interesting. Proselytism and conversion. All right. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. And this from the declaration of the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948. Now, we know who was behind this establishment of the state of Israel, and it was no one like our kind behind the establishment of the state of Israel. These were all European kin. These were all white men who made the claim that these folks were the same as the folks who trekked from Israel. We're going to take a look to see if we can tell. As a result of the historic catastrophe in which Titus of Rome destroyed Jerusalem and Israel was exiled from its land, I was born in one of the cities of the exile, but always I regarded myself as one who was born in Jerusalem. Really? Are you one who has regarded yourself that was born in Jerusalem? Really? Interesting. You associate yourself because you were born in one of the cities of exile. And that somehow you connect the historic tissue between you and who the folks of the time of Rome and Jerusalem's time were exiled. Folks, we're going to investigate this because that don't sound right to me. Even Israelis who are not familiar with the historic opening passage of their proclamation of independence must have held a 50 shekel note that bears the moving words spoken by S.I. Agnon when he received the Nobel Prize. Just like the authors of the proclamation, like most of Israel's citizens, the eminent author knew that the Jewish nation was exiled after the fall of the Second Temple in 70 CE, then wandering about the world inspired by the 2,000-year-long hope of being a free people, in the words of the Israeli national anthem in its ancient homeland. Now, folks, I need you to know where that's going and what's that saying, because it's obvious these folks over there ain't playing. They truly believe the attempt to deceive. Uprooting the deportation are concepts deeply embedded in Jewish tradition in all its forms. But their significance has changed over the history of the religion. They do not always bear the secular meaning with which they came to be imbued in modern times. Jewish monotheism began to take shape among the cultural elites who were forcibly deported after the fall of the kingdom of Judah in the 6th century BCE. And the imagery of exile, wandering, already reverberates directly or metaphorically in a major part of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the final section of the Old Testament. From the expulsion from Edom through Abraham's migration to Canaan and Jacob's descent into Egypt, The prophecies of Zechariah and Daniel, Jewish religion gazed back through a perspective of wanderings, uprootings, and returns. The Torah already stated, the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. Okay. The fall of the first temple was associated with expulsion. And this literary theological memory helped shape subsequent Jewish religious sensibilities. So what they're doing here, folks, is laying a foundation. Now, remember, I don't read ahead to the point that I will spoil the surprise. I want to be just as shocked and shaken as you may be taken. Who knows? However, a close examination of the historical event that apparently engendered the second exile in the year 70 CE and an analysis of the Hebrew term golah, exile, and its connotation in late Hebrew indicate that the national historic consciousness was, listen to this, a patchwork of disparate events and traditional elements. Only in this way could it function as an effective myth that provided modern Jews with a pathway to ethnic identity. All right. Okay, sounds like we're getting into the weeds here. Sounds like we're getting into the meat of the matter. I don't know. They may get a bit sadder by the time I finish. But listen, only in this way. Now, again, it says, could it function as an effective myth? This man calls what they attach themselves to or the act itself a myth. So either way, we're going to figure out what he's saying. Okay. The ultra paradigm of deportation was essential for the construction of a long-term memory wherein an imaginary exiled people race could be described as the direct descendants of the former people of the Bible. Okay, so every sentence here I've got to take real slow. As we shall see, the myth of uprooting and exile was fostered by the Christian tradition, from which it flowed into Jewish tradition and grew to be the truth engraved in history, both the general and the national. So, what direction is Mr. Shlomo going? Now, let's not go too far without knowing that Shlomo himself is Jewish. So, what story will he tell? He might tell one that tells us you wish. So, I'm not going to read into where this is going because just for your knowledge, there's just no way of knowing. But I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this right now. Eat the meat, spit out the bone, leave whatever you don't accept alone. That's how we get along on this show. And that's the only thing I've taken from T.L. Ministries, brother Yacoba and his brother Teo. So, and if you want spiritual nourishment, go over to T.L. Ministries. Here, I curse, we talk. It's pretty plain. All right. You know what I'm saying. Next. All right. So, interesting. This is very interesting. However, a close examination of historical events engendered the okay, just want to make sure. The people exiled in 70 CE. It must first of all be emphasized that the Romans never deported entire peoples. All right, let's stop there. Okay. It must first of all be emphasized that the Romans never deported entire peoples. We might add that neither did the Assyrians and Babylonians move entire populations from the countries they conquered. All right. It did not pay to uproot the people of the land, the cultivators of produce, the taxpayers. But even the efficient policy of deportation practiced by the Assyrian and later by the Babylonian Empire, in which whole sections of local administrative and cultural elites were deported, were not followed by the Roman Empire. Oh, so there has to be a reason the Negro is on a run, because that's what we're talking about here. Kind of intermixture, but let's continue. This is interesting. Here and there in the Western Mediterranean countries, local farming communities were displaced to make room for the settling of Roman soldiers. With this exceptional policy was not applied in the Near East. Roman rulers could be utterly ruthless in suppressing rebellious subject population. They executed fighters, took captives and sold them into slavery, and sometimes exiled kings and princes. But they definitely did not deport whole populations in the countries they conquered in the East, nor did they have the means to do so. None of the trucks, trains, or great ships available in the modern world. Okay, so they didn't have the means to deport entire populations. So how did they get where they were going and where they were going and why were they going with? See, this is very interesting. Flavius Josephus, the historian of the Zealot revolt in the year 66, is almost the only source for this exile, aside from archaeological findings dating to that time. His book, Wars of the Jews, describes the tragic outcome of that period's conflict. The devastation did not spread throughout the kingdom of Judea, but affected mainly Jerusalem and a number of other fortified cities. Josephus estimated that 1.1 million people died in the siege of Jerusalem and the great massacre that followed. That 97,000 were taken captive, and that a few thousand more were killed in other cities. So, in my estimation, that talks about our run, if you will, how Judea may have slowly evolved into Palestine, and how Arabs may have overtaken that area once filled with Negroes and not Europeans who were, I believe, either from or in that time. No, they were in the Caucasus Mountains at that time. They haven't even, I don't believe they even moved toward Ukraine, or maybe they were Khazaria, fighting the Muslims who at that point were trying to overtake what we now know to be Palestine. You guys talk amongst yourselves as I'd sit here and drift. I'm just trying to give y'all a mental lift. Next, moving on. Like all ancient historians, Josephus tended to exaggerate his numbers. Today, most scholars believe that virtually all demographic figures from antiquity are overstated, and that a good many have numerological significance. Josephus does state that a large number of pilgrims had gathered in Jerusalem before the uprising, but the assumption that more than 1 million people were killed there is not credible. Population of the city of Rome at the height of the empire in the 2nd century might have approached the size of a medium modern conurbation. But there was no such metropolis in the little kingdom of Judea. A cautious estimate suggests that Jerusalem at the time could have had a population of 60,000 to 70,000 inhabitants. Even if we accept the unrealistic figure of 70,000 captives, it still does not mean that the evil Titus, who destroyed the temple, expelled the Jewish people. Rome's great arc of Titus shows Roman soldiers carrying the plundered temple candelabra, not as taught in Israeli schools, Judean captives carrying it on their way to exile. Now let's sit here just a while. And so who were the people sold out of Judea while y'all playing? You know what I'm saying? That's a very interesting piece of history. Let's see if we can solve the mystery. Here we go. That's interesting. I like that. Nor have any traces been found of large refugee populations around the borders of Judea after the uprising, as there would have been if a mass flight had taken place. Correct. So who is going where? We do not know exactly how large the population of Judea, currently Palestine, where they're fighting right now and going out of their mind, was prior to the revolt of the Zealots and the war against Rome. Here, too, Josephus's figures are useless. He states, for example, that there were 3 million inhabitants in the Galilee. Archaeological surveys conducted in recent decades suggest that in the 8th century BCE, in the whole land of Canaan, that is, the strong kingdom of Israel and the small kingdom of Judea, there were some 460,000 inhabitants. Megan Broshi, an Israeli archaeologist, calculated on the basis of the wheat growing capacity of the country between the sea and the Jordan River, that at its most flourishing, during the Byzantine period in the 6th century, could have sustained no more than 1 million inhabitants. Now, delve into this, Negro. Hence, it is reasonable to assume that on the eve of the Zealot uprising, the population of the extended kingdom of Judea was between 500,000 and 1 million people. Wars, epidemics, droughts, or onerous taxation could have reduced the population, but before the botanical and agro-industrial revolution of modern times, the number of inhabitants could not increase to any great extent. Now, let me just say this, and I will not relent. This appears to me to have been an opening for those who wanted to perhaps get rid of Negroes. You understand where I'm at there? Because in all of this time, we weren't being traded, not just yet. That comes a bit later. But I just thought I'd point that out. Let's just get back to it and see what it's about. All right, relax. Zealots are internecine wars and their uprising against the Romans dealt the country massive blows, and the demoralization of the cultural elites after the destruction of the temple must have been profound. It's quite likely that the population in and around Jerusalem remained diminished for some time, but as already stated, it was not expelled, and before long, recovered economically. Archaeological discoveries have shown that Josephus exaggerated the devastation and that several cities had recovered their population by the end of the 1st century CE. Moreover, the Jewish religious culture was about to enter one of its most impressive and fruitful periods. Unfortunately, there is little information about the systems of political relations during this period. Now, Negroes, I wonder where all of this goes. It would appear that somebody may have missed a thing here and there. I don't know. Well, let's see about the Negro. They're not even saying a thing about us, huh? Of course they're not. This is Mr. Shlomo's bus. All right. Here we go. We also have little information about the Second Messianic Revolt, which shook Judean history in the 2nd century CE. The uprising that broke out in 132 CE in the reign of the Emperor Hadrian, popularly known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt, is mentioned briefly by the Roman historian Cassius Dio and by Eusebius, the bishop of Caesarea, and the author of Ecclesiastical History. Echoes of the events appear in the Jewish religious texts as well as in archaeological findings. Regrettably, there's no historian of the status of Josephus' time, so any reconstruction of events can only be fragmentary. The question arises, was the traditional story of the expulsion due to the traumatic consequences of that revolt. During the conclusion of the revolt, Cassius Dio wrote, almost like they're trying to take my job, huh, y'all? You hear that? Make sure here. 50 of their most important outposts, 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of where? Judea was made desolate. The whole of Judea was made desolate. The characteristic exaggeration is plain to see. The figures used by ancient historians always seem to call for the subtraction of a zero, but even this grim report says nothing about deportations, because I'm wondering, we're just sold into slavery and they didn't call it that. Jerusalem was to be renamed Alea Capitolina, and circumcised men were for some time barred from entering it. For 3 years, harsh restrictions were imposed on the local populace, especially around the capital, and religious persecution was intensified. Captive fighters were probably taken away and others must have fled from the area, but the Judean masses were not exiled in 135 CE. The name Provincia Judea was changed, listen to this, folks, to Provincia Syria Palestina, later Palestine. But its population in the 2nd century CE remained predominantly Judeans and Samaritans, and it continued to flourish for 1 or 2 generations after the end of the revolt. And this was what I see, where Negroes may have been sold into slavery. Hey, I'm just looking at the facts, no matter how unsavory. Okay, I'll stop, fine. By the end of the 2nd century and beginning of the 3rd, not only had most of the farming population recovered and agriculture production stabilized, but the country's culture attained what came to be thought of as its golden age in the time of Rabbi Judah Hanasi. You could have worded that better. Stop. The year 2020 CE saw the completion and final arrangement of the 6 parts of the Mishnah, a far more decisive historical event than the Bar Kokhba revolt and the development of Jewish identity and religion. So, what was the origin of the great myth of the exilation of the Jewish people following the destruction of the temple? Well, now, hold on. Before he gets into this, and let me just say this because I need to. I don't know where this is going to go. Okay, I don't know what excuse they may make. You know, they haven't even mentioned Negroes, for goodness sake. And I'm wondering, I mean, you know, they've never admitted it up till this point, so they're not going to admit it while I'm doing this joint, right? Right? I'm waiting for the bullshit, like folks sitting in the pool pit. They're going to shovel it hard, they're going to shovel it fast, but I'm going to read it as well as I can, and it won't last. Prepare yourselves. Again, folks, don't choke. Here we go. Chet Milikowski, a scholar at Bar Ilan University, has found evidence in numerous contemporary rabbinical sources that in the 2nd and 3rd century CE, the term gulat, exile, was used in the sense of political subjugation rather than deportation. The 2 meanings were not necessarily connected. Boy, that is a beautiful excuse he's perfected, huh? You just turn exile into something else. You turn exile into suppression, political subjugation. And you just cancel out the enslavement of the Negro nation. Is that what we're facing? I don't think so. That's not how it's going to go on this show, just so you know. But it's an interesting turn, and it's one we all needed to learn. You know, you got to work for this education. It's one you got to earn. Oh, stop it. Whatever. I'll just do what I want. All right. Other rabbinical sources refer to the Babylonian exile as the only gulat, only they regard it as ongoing even after the fall of the second temple. Israel Jacob Yuval, a historian of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, went further. He went further into the bullshit. Okay, let's do it. He proposed to show that the renewed Jewish myth about the exile, in fact, arose fairly late and was due mainly to the rise of Christian mythology about the Jews being exiled in punishment for the rejection and crucifixion of Jesus. Now, I got me a theory. Let me go over it with you. I believe they sold Negroes into slavery using the Palestinians that they found so unsavory. And later they fought over the land and, I just cannot understand why they lie instead of facing the truth. But, it's escaping. The truth is getting loose. It seems that the source of discourse regarding the anti-Jewish exile lies in the writings of Justin Martyr, who in the mid-2nd century linked the expulsion of circumcised men from Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt with divine collective punishment. He was followed by other Christian authors who regarded the presence of Jews outside their sacred land as the punishment and proof of their sin. The myth of exile began to be slowly appropriated and integrated into Jewish tradition. Now, let's stop a moment and please listen. If there wasn't a need for them to make an excuse, then how could they allow this book to let loose? You understand where I'm at with that? They feel the need to address their origins. I wonder how deep this goes into what he's going to say next. I mean, is it identity he's going to protect? Is he still claiming to be those people just kind of skewing the way they got where they are? Because that's not an explanation that's going to make it, not even a little and by far. But before we continue, let me introduce, I'm going to say our sponsor. That's right. I'm going to let it loose. It's important I do this because this guy's worked hard and we got off to a rocky start. I will say that. It's my fault because, the circumstances were such, but let me introduce you to Twid as I take a break, twidwear.com. Now, the apparel is amazing, but you can use the promo code TDRS, as you can see on the bottom of your screen as I just take a moment to address my sponsor and the fact that he'll give you 10% off. Now, this is a brother that has this wonderful company. And I call it that because he built it from the ground up. His idea, TWID, is an acronym for that's what. That's the acronym. And everybody knows what I do. I talk my head off inside. That's what I do. And this is my sponsor. And, you got to eat what you get. And as of yet, I haven't had a large offer. So if you guys know people that are, a part of a sports team or in schools, you know what I mean, and they need some custom apparel that might serve them well, Twidwear is the best apparel that I've ever seen, and I can tell. He sent me some of this stuff, and I think and he really showed some love. And, it's too thick for me. I just want a blue hat and a blue shirt so I can repad. And he knows that. He heard. But look at that. In 13 to 15 years, I believe I'm going to call it 15 years. I've known him that long. But he's still around and going strong. He's going to be on the show at some point. I'm going to interview you to show at least his focus to me is because he's a Hebrew. He's conscious of our second Exodus. He's conscious of all these things. He still has, in my opinion, amazing products he brings. And he's got a line of Twid skincare that will be rolling out soon. I'll get some promo shots of that, hopefully. I'll see to that. But again, use the promo code TDRS, that's the acronym for The Doug Rice Show. I'm going to tell you how this goes so that you know you register, you give him your email, you do all the things that you do for name brands that you are accustomed to. This is a Negro who other Negroes should support, just as I support while I retort. Twidwear.com, TWIDWEAR.com, twidwear.com. Please support this effort by supporting his effort. Buy some stuff, recommend it. You know, that's what I'm asking. All right, I'm going to get back to the show. And again, if you want to support the Doug Rice Show, let me throw up some other information so you know. Okay, I have recently gotten a Patreon account, patreon.com/the Doug Rice Show. It's right down below, just so you know. And the Cash App is the fastest app, and that's that. The other two I've not really gone through, but hey, send there too if you want to. You know, I do need your assistance. Lately, in my efforts, I've gotten some resistance, and that's to be expected as you turn your back on the world. The world is going to turn its back on you, you know, and that's how it's going to go. So I would hope that you support the Doug Rice Show. Thank you for that promo. All right. We're good. We're good. I'm back. All right, so back to what we were reading, because you know this is the information we're needing. Yes, I think I was right there. It was in the Babylon Talmud, however. The Babylonian Talmud. Now, we went over a show before last, okay? And it'll be up there, but it's a show from the past. What the Babylonian Talmud reads, and it's information that every Negro needs. I mean that. I do. However, that the first statements appear linking the exile with the fall of the Second Temple. A Jewish community had existed in Babylonia continuously since the 6th century BCE. And not even during the powerful Hasmonean kingdom did it ever seek to return to Zion. Meanwhile, we were getting sold into slavery and dying. Perhaps following the destruction of the Second Temple, this gave rise to the narrative linking the fall with renewed exile as an echo of an ancient event, a catastrophe that provided a religious rationale for weeping by the rivers that flowed not far from Jerusalem. Now, are they going to tell the truth here? Is Shlomo Sand really going to, have me demand that he tell the truth and that their origins do not stem from below? And it's not just because Doug Rice said so. We have the receipts all folded and neat, but that's not something I need to repeat. With the triumph of Christianity in the early 4th century CE, when it became the religion of the empire, the Jewish believers in other parts of the world also began to adopt the notion of exile as divine punishment. Okay, so the connection between uprooting and sin, destruction, and exile became embedded in the various definitions of the Jewish presence around the world. Now wait, what were they doing during this time? These individuals were slyly selling Negroes into slavery. This is an amazing bit of information. They know that they are not the holy Negro nation. They know it. And this man gives every excuse as to why they belong in the land they don't belong in. And he's not being obtuse. He's coming on strong. Okay, I'll stop. Okay. The myth, the wandering Jew, punished for his transgressions, was rooted in the dialectic of Christian-Jewish hatred that would mark the boundaries of both religions through the following centuries. What is more significant, however, is that henceforth the concept of exile took on an outright metaphysical connotation within Jewish traditions going far beyond simply being away from one's homeland. Oh my goodness. Can you just see them obfuscating? They are blurring the lines between reality and fantasy while slowly selling Negroes into slavery. Claiming descent from the original Jewish Jerusalem deportees was essential, like belonging to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What? What did you just say? I didn't hear you. What? Wait, let me read that again. Claiming. Is he not touching all around the fact? Come on, folks. Is he not doing that? Claiming descent from the original Jerusalem deportees was essential. It was essential. Like belonging to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Otherwise, the standing of the Jewish believer as a member of the chosen people is not assured. Let's read again that manure, because that is a confession. Listen to this, what he's addressing. Claiming descent from the original Jerusalem deportees was essential, like belonging to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Otherwise, the standing of the Jewish believer as a member of the chosen people was not assured. They want to be us. They want what's yours. Moreover, being an exile became an existential situation of diminishing territorial significance. Oh, really? Oh, you put that real nice. Oh, no. There's significance, partner, dude. You being just a bit rude. What? Did he just say that? He let that flow out nice, didn't he? Okay, I'll stop. Exile, in fact, was anywhere, even in the Holy Land. Oh, okay. Later, the Kabbalah made it a central attribute of the divinity. For the Shekinah, the divine spirit, is always in exile. Listen, these folks can generalize and homogenize and modernize and mitigate, and all that is too late. That's just something. Wow. Did y'all read that? Did you read that? Because I read that. The concept of exile came to shape the definitions of rabbinical Judaism vis-a-vis Christianity's growing might. The devotees of the Old Testament's Judaic faith rejected the salvation of the world that Jesus brought with his sacrifice, continuing to identify themselves as Jews. They did not accept the Christian concept of grace created by the resurrection of the crucified Savior. To them, the existing world was still suffering and would continue to suffer until the coming of the true Messiah. Now, let's stop there just for a minute. Really? Well, you guys told me that you had the Messiah over in Israel before all this popped off, right? Wasn't that, his name was Shlomo, by the way, right? Nice kid, right? Looked like it was 28, 29, 30, wore some glasses, nice little curls on either side. He was just, he just had a beautiful grin. It was wild. And I heard this guy could quote the Bible from back to front to back, and like that, you know? So I understand your Messiah has returned, and since he's returned, well, what have we learned? Nothing. Not a damn thing. And let me tell you what your Messiah didn't bring. God Almighty. Yeah, you see, because after you announced the Messiah to me, everything started getting set on fire. You see, I don't know. You said there was a Messiah. You took photos. I saw him. And then suddenly they started lobbing bombs at you before him. So what happened? Where's he at? Is he okay? Hey, somebody go check out Shlomo, the Messiah, over in Jerusalem and make sure he's good. Hey, because that's what a good person should do. Okay, let's just move on. I got so much to say. Sorry. To them, I'm sorry, the existing world was still suffering and continued suffering. We already read that. Thus, the exile was a form of religious catharsis, which also served to wash away sins. Whoa! Let me back in. What did they just say? So you figure, wait a minute, they're just doing Greg Louganis backflips into empty pools, and they're just looking like contemptuous fools. I can't even imagine how their mouths drool in trying to be Negroes. Let's take them to school. All right, I'm sorry, I had to go there because that's amazing. Think about what they're saying here, folks. They're bending over backward to be us. Okay, so I'm just sorry. Thus, the exile was a form of religious catharsis. Catharsis, not catharsis. Listen to that, which also served to wash away sins. The longed for salvation, the antithesis of exile, could come only with the end of days. Exile, therefore, was not a location away from the homeland, now they say, but a condition that is not salvation. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. The anticipated salvation would come when the Messianic king of the seed of David arrived, and with this a mass returned to Jerusalem. Salvation would include the resurrection of the dead, who would also congregate in mass in Jerusalem. Well, what story are they telling? What lie are they yelling? Because that's not how the scriptures say it's going to go. And I can read it right here just so you know. It is not a mystery, the coming history these folks are going to suffer. Right now, all of this seems a bit passé, you know? I mean, we're, if you can't admit it, in the last day. But this guy says, and we just read it. I mean, I didn't make this up. He said it, that these Jews await the Messiah, one that they've said has arrived. I might remind you. And at that point, the anticipated salvation would come when that seed of David arrived, and then there'd be a mass return to Jerusalem. Right now, it appears to be a mass exodus because they're bruising them. Yeah, I said that. I apologize about that, but it's out there now. For an oppressed religious minority living in the midst of a hegemonic religious culture, the exile connoted a temporal defeat, the fall of the temple. But the future that would annul it was wholly messianic and totally outside the power of the humbled Jews. Only that future, whether immediate or distant, but certainly lying outside of human time, guaranteed the salvation and perhaps the coming of universal power. That was the reason Jews did not always seek to return to their ancient homeland. And the few who did so were denounced as false messiahs. There were, of course, some devout pilgrims who were permitted to make an individual act of going up to Jerusalem, and many went in order to be buried there. But a collective migration for the purpose of living a full Jewish life in the holy city was not part of the religious imagination. And the few who proposed it were exceptional or eccentric. Well, my goodness, are we not learning a few things today? And while I have this in front of me, let me say, you can obtain this on Amazon. I mean, it's very, very common, the book. There's where it's on. The Invention of the Jewish People, and we are getting an education, are we not? They're making every obfuscation regarding the slave trade, which we know that they made. And they're also reducing, if you will, the need to leave Israel. They're not convinced that being sold out or the escape now has doubt. And that's an interesting topic to be talking about. Yeah, whatever. Curiously, it was the Karaites' relationship with Jerusalem that led a good many of them to migrate there, and even to call on their fellow believers to do so. These Protestant Jews who stuck to the Old Testament and refused to accept the oral law, the Mishnah and Talmud, were unaffected by rabbinical Judaism's rigid and confining conception of exile. They could ignore its prohibitions relating to the holy city and settled there in large numbers. With their distinctive mourning over the destruction, they were known as the Mourners of Zion. They apparently constituted the majority of Jerusalem's population in the 9th and 10th centuries. Now, again, they continue to not talk about the slave trade. They continue to not talk about the change made, the skin tone. I mean, we're on our own. But I'm never going to leave this topic alone. The number of rabbinical prohibitions forbade hastening the salvation and therefore migrating to the source from which it would arise. The most prominent prohibitions were the famous 3 vows in the what? The Babylonian Talmud. That Israel must not seek to rise up over the wall, that the Holy One, blessed be he, adjourned Israel not to rise up against the nations of the world, that Holy One, blessed be he, adjourned the adulterers not to enslave Israel overmuch. Are you guys listening to that and such? Wow. So this Babylonian Talmud is diametrically opposed to the historices or the historics of our scriptures. It goes in direct opposition to God's holy mission involving Negroes. And it throws the balance off the world. And that's the reason they're in turmoil and on our holy soil. And they're claiming themselves to be us. That's very interesting. Folks, you need to connect the Talmud against the scriptures. It's very specific. It permits most of what God prohibits. And in this respect, it cancels out what the Creator has said would happen. And we know because we've read to Negroes, true Israel, the holy nation, not this unholy aberration. These folks are not Israel, and they've rewritten the book. All you have to do is take a look at what is this? The Babylonian Talmud. It'll get you shook. Very interesting. Rise up over the wall meant mass migration to the Holy Land, and this clear-cut prohibition affected Jews throughout the ages, instilling and acceptance of exile as a divine ordinance not to be broken. It was forbidden to hasten the end and rebel against God's spirit. To the believers, the exile was not a temporary concrete condition that could be altered by migration across the world, but a situation that defined the entire existing physical world. Bullshit. It was a physical thing that involved Negroes and not them. And as they made this shit up, putting it in the cabal, they sold us into slavery. And I mean, that's it. That's all. That's what happened here, folks. Remember, Shlomo Sand wrote this book, The Invention of the Jewish People. He's telling half-truths, okay? They're terrified the other half might get let loose. It's true. Therefore, when the Jewish cultural centers in Babylonia declined, the Jews migrated to Baghdad, not to Jerusalem, although both cities were ruled by the same caliphate. The Jewish deportees from Spain migrated to cities all around the Mediterranean, but only a few chose to go to Zion. In the modern age, with its ferocious pogroms and the rise of aggressive nationalism in Eastern Europe, masses of the Yiddish people migrated westward, mainly into the United States. And nowhere does he mention a Negro face. Notice that we're not even in place. I mean, that's something. That's something right there. This guy's telling some good story. All right. Only when the American borders closed in the 1920s and again after the horrendous Nazi massacres did significant numbers migrate to mandatory Palestine, part of which became the state of Israel. The Jews were not forcibly deported from their homeland, and there was no voluntarily returned to it. Exile, expulsion, history in the Twilight Zone. When Heinrich Graetz came to describe the fall of the Second Temple in his book, History of the Jews, he began by comparing it with the destruction of the First Temple. Once more did Zion sit weeping amid the ruins, weeping over her sons fallen in battle, over her daughters sold into slavery. Sold into slavery. Sold into slavery. Or abandoned to the savage soldiery of Rome. But she was more desolate now than in the days of her first captivity, for hushed was the voice of the prophet who once foretold the end of her widowhood and her mourning. The historical story was thus fashioned on the biblical model of the destruction, as was the deportation that followed. This first proto-Zionist historian, oh my goodness, man, this dude can write. I ain't gonna tell you, okay? He is writing like a razor's edge. He is right there on the very ledge. He does not choose to cross over into Negroes, peruse, it's lost over. He just stays right there, doesn't he? Wow. I mean, this guy's good, yo. Look, I don't think he's going to mention a Negro in the entire read. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just reading chapter 3, but we'll see. Proto-Zionist? You go, boy. That's nice right there, right there. This first proto-Zionist historian proceeded to narrate the tragedy in an agonized tone. It would indeed be difficult to describe the suffering of those who were taken captive in the war, estimated to number 900,000 youths under the age of 16. Most of the female captives were sold into slavery at an incredibly low price, for the market was glutted. Really? I wonder who they were selling. Graetz naturally borrowed the narrative about the end of the Zealot revolt from Josephus and further inflated his numbers. Now that's this guy's claim. I wonder which side he's on, I wonder. He even added information lacking in the original, highlighting the sacred pairing of destruction and exile. All these calamities came with such crushing force on the remaining Jews that they felt utterly at a loss as to what they should do. Judea was depopulated. The third banishment, the Roman exile under Vespasian and Titus, had commenced amid greater terror and cruelty than the Babylonian exile under Nebuchadnezzar. Only a few were spared. What was to be the future of the Jewish nation of Judaism? Look, folks, this is when the turn of the worm and where you learn that they earn and we burn. They're not discussing the transatlantic slave trade's precipice or the precedent before it, and the clearing out of Negroes and the scattering of Negro faces and the replacement in certain places. They'd rather that history remain in stasis. Okay, we'll just continue. Let's move on. He answers these menacing rhetorical questions in the negative. The nation of Judah, Negroes would survive, and so would its religion, but they are not the nation of Judah. We'll just continue. Or else Gatz would not have been able to write his fine book. Moreover, unlike the fall of the First Temple, this one left a remnant of the people clinging to its homeland. This enables the historian to continue the pathos-filled narrative about the Jewish people in its land. But already at this stage, he creates an indirect meta-image of uprooting and wandering. Why? Why? Listen carefully, folks. I need you to pay attention carefully to this. At this stage, what he does is he creates an indirect meta-image of uprooting and wandering. Let me tell you why. It may have been, in fact, the case because we as Negroes were being uprooted and being replaced with those that were accustomed to wandering. Remember that the Khazarian converts that slowly filled in the blanks as they battled the Muslims above them just before the Caucasus Mountains would infuse into our territory, lightening up the shade, a thing or two, bringing into the Negro presence all that bastardized our spiritual worship of God Almighty. They picked apart the Negro heart. They took from us and made thrice things, two things, three things. They made Catholicism, Islam, and they made Judaism. That's the final bomb. And during this moment in time, I can only find that mixture, that intermixture, was reoccurring. And that's how this kettle pot got stirring. So remember, he's quoting something, that indirect meta image of uprooting and wandering, because that is what was going on, just in case you were wondering. This is reinforced in his description of the consequences of the Bar Kokhba revolt that broke out 65 years later. Thus, all the warriors were destroyed. You mean all the Negroes? All the towns and villages laid waste and the land literally converted into a desert. The prisoners, mostly women and children, were dragged by the thousands to the slave markets of Hebron. Who they were. I wonder who they were. I don't know. And Gaza, there were many sold. Many fugitives, however, fled to Arabia, whence that country's obtained its Jewish population, which afterward played so important a part in its history. Now, folks, you know what occurred because you've read it and you've already heard. They're telling us right to our face that Negroes were being replaced. They're telling us it's right there. Can't you see it? Okay. Note that nowhere does Gates speak of the whole people being exiled, nor does he speak of Negroes being sold into slavery, but we'll just keep going. He stresses the captivity and the flight of many from Judea, currently Palestine, very skillfully in the literally genre of tragedy. He interweaves and links the two historical uprisings into a single national sequence. The repeated comparison with the fall of the First Temple, with consequences familiar to most of his readers, rounds off the picture, but it does not round it off perfectly because he negates to mention the sale of Negroes, true Hebrews, as they were slowly replaced by this infusion of Jews into Judea. Of course, they were not welcome there. They were fighting against the Muslims to keep them from entering into Europe. My God, this guy writes well. There's some pancakes with his syrup. Yeah, whatever. Simon Dubnow also makes no mention of deportation. Moreover, unlike Grates, the Russian Jewish historian. Stop. What is he? He's a Russian Jewish historian. What does he know? Nothing. He's a convert. Just like Shlomo Sand, he's a convert. So this is written from the convert's perspective. So don't allow it to get into your Negro connective. Okay? Just to give you the once over. All right. He follows the literary examples of Josephus and Grates in describing the fall in dramatic and shocking terms. Thousands of captives are carried away to the ends of the empire, leaving Judah thinly populated. A similar description follows the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt. A great number of captives are sold into slavery, and an equal number of rebels become fugitives. Is this guy not going to just tell the truth? Come on, folks. What is going on? He's saying what's going on, but he's not really saying what's going on. He's telling you that a mixture of Jews were sold into slavery like me and like you, but hey, who knew? Come on, man, that's just something. But Dubnow does not create a meta image of the Jewish people going into exile after the destruction of the temple. And it is clear to readers that the people were not forcibly uprooted from its country. Salobran employs a similar rhetoric. The New York historian does not link the destruction with the deportation, but as we shall see, tends rather to highlight other reasons for the presence of Jews outside Judea. Is anybody going to say they ain't even Jews? Is anybody going to even historically peruse and try to get the news, the point they're going to lose? He lingers on the tragic consequences of the two uprisings, but is more meticulous in stressing the end of Judean statehood. This is not depicted as a drama, but rather as a lengthy, logical, historical process. To Baron, the most significant issue, and one related to the subject of the previous chapter, is to avoid a connection between the end of Judea as a political entity and the disappearance of the Jewish ethnic nation. He confronts the historical analysis of Theodore Monsman, Julius Wellhouse, and other Gentile historians who describe Jewish communities after the fall of Jerusalem as religious groups rather than as one people, by asserting that from the time of Nebuchadnezzar to modern times, there has been a distinctive Jewish ethnos, which never completely fitted into the general patterns of national divisions. What? So now y'all saying Jews weren't Negroes. Come on, man. Listen to what they're doing, Shlomo Sand. The Jews then are a people with an extraordinary past unlike any other people. Well, let me go up and yell it from the steeple. Yeah, we are. Negroes are extremely unique. And if you're trying to find the truth in this, keep seeking, because you ain't going to find it. I'm going to keep speaking. This is very interesting to know that this is one of the most popular selling books out there, an international bestseller. Now, what that means, Negroes, is that this goes in front of the face of so many people, and they get half the story. No mention is any of their glory. You know, it's all about just their glory, and it's an interesting pattern I've seen that they use. They tell half the story, the other half they lose. What, you thought I was going to mess that up? No, I'm not going to mess that up, all right? We find as we proceed, typical Zionist historiography, that the essence of the discourse does not change. Neither, surprisingly, did the Zionist historians describe an expulsion following the destruction of the temple. But here we find a different chronological surprise. The historian Yitzhak Beer's well-known book, Gulot, begins by describing the meaning of the long exile. Oh, let's hear his lie. The destruction of the Second Temple widened the breach in the nation's historical continuity and augments the treasury of national religious jewels whose loss is to be mourned. The temple and its cult, the mutilated theocracy, the national autonomy, the holy soil even further from reclamation. This dude need to stop. Stop it, man. You sold Negroes into slavery. Can you understand? For Baal, the ground is slowly slipping from under the people's feet, but the Jewish nation is not torn from it in a single violent act, even though its kingdom has been lost for a long time. Light up, wait, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Wait a minute. Come on, folks. Did you hear him? He just skirted the truth. It's like he careened into the turn and touched the truth and just kept on so you wouldn't learn. I'm gonna just go ahead and repeat that. He says that the ground is slowly slipping from under the people's feet, but the Jewish nation is not torn from it in a single violent act. This is what Bauer says. Even though its kingdom has been lost for a long time. You mean Negroes, the royal Negroes you sold into slavery and slowly replaced, even though they're gone, you just carry on. Stop. Life on this national soil goes on. Oh, goodness. Despite the massive destruction, and so does the heroic struggle. They make this heroic. Listen to this. The struggle of the zealots for political freedom and the firm establishment of God's supremacy continued from the time of Bar Kokhba's revolt up to the conquest of Palestine by the Arabs. Only after stubborn resistance, was the lesson learned that love cannot be prematurely aroused. The kingdom of God cannot be set up by force. One cannot rise in rebellion against the overlordship of the nations. Well, let me just tell you something. I got something for this creation. Now, you need to hear what they're saying. They're against God Almighty, and they're not playing. They're the opposite in everything they're saying. Only after stubborn resistance was the lesson learned that love cannot be prematurely aroused, that the kingdom of God cannot be set up by force. The kingdom of God is going to be set up by force. I need you to hear that, holy Negroes. Feel that. That's the truth. Nearly everything these folks present about themselves is a ruse. And most of them don't even see the point that they lose. Oh, stop it. I'm just having fun. Bear was a painstaking and thoughtful historian. He not only knew the mass of his sources about the fall of the Second Temple, but was also familiar with the abundant materials of medieval Judaism. But if there was no expulsion, it was still necessary to have a forced exile. Otherwise, it would be impossible to understand the organic history of the wandering Jewish people, which, for some reason, never hastened to return to its homeland. That's because the reason they didn't want to return to their homeland is because they knew they were not from there. That is why these Ashkenazi Khazarian converts didn't want to, they left it up in the air. And I mean, that's what they did. They really did. They left it up in the air. That was good, but it's true. Okay. Okay. The start of the exile without expulsion was different from the exile that Jewish tradition mistakenly dated to the fall of the temple in the 1st century CE. The long exile was, in fact, considerably shorter because it began only with the Arab conquest. Well, what about the slave trade? Well, you know the point I've made. This exile without expulsion, which began in the 7th century CE, that is, some 6 centuries after the fall of the 2nd century, was not Yitzhak Bear's invention alone. This astonishing discovery was made by other Zionist scholars as well, notably Bear's friend and historiographical comrade in arms, Ben Zion Denur. The first of his famous collection of sources, Israel in Exile, first published in the 1920s, later acquired a subtitle, From the Conquest of the Land of Israel by the Arabs to the Crusades. Aware that he had to prepare his readers for a new national historical sequence, Denur prefaced the sources with a long exposition on his novel chronology. Did y'all read that nice and slow? Do you know why they didn't want us to read so you know? So you know. I began the period of Israel in exile with the conquest of the land of Israel by the Arabs. Really? You mean just about the time you guys were turning whites? Well, okie dokie. All right. Until that time, the history of Israel was mainly that of the Jewish nation in its homeland. You mean before that time, the Jewish nation was mostly Negroes. It was not necessary to explain the true exile in relation to the nation as a mass historical entity, not in its individual members, not as the Negroes they truly were. Began only when the land of Israel ceased to be a land of Jews because others arrived, settled in it permanently, and claimed it for generations. They finally got some truth in there for the Negro nation. Did you hear that? I'll read it again. It is not necessary to explain that the true exile in relation to the nation as a mass historical entity, not its individual members, began only when the land of Israel ceased to be a land of Negroes. I'm going to put Negroes in there. Of Negroes. Because others arrived claiming to be Jews, settled in it permanently, and claimed it for generations. That is how that should read for the Negro nation. True, tradition and popular perception do not distinguish between our people's loss of power over the country and the loss of the land from under its feet. But from the historical viewpoint, it is necessary to distinguish between these two situations. They were not contemporaneous and are historically distinctive. The chronological revision is significant and decisive, and they will be seen as undermining Jewish tradition. It seems to have originated from two linked causes. Pay attention. The basis requirements of professional historiography prevented the first two Zionist historians from asserting that the Jewish people had been expelled after the fall of the Second Temple. The urge to reduce the time in exile to a minimum so as to maximize the national proprietary claim over the country. This consideration also prompted Denur to date the beginning of the rebellion against exile and the early zephyrs of modern Elia to the immigration of Judah he Hasid and his companions in 1700. Not until it was white enough, not until enough Ashkenazi Khazarian converts leaked their way down in Jerusalem, slowly selling Negroes into slavery and replacing the population. That is the missing link involving the Negro nation. Where the Roman Empire gradually reduced the political power of the Kingdom of Judea was important, but not as important as the historical development that actually led to the exile. The invasion of the country by desert dwellers in the 7th century and their seizure of Jewish-owned lands changed the country's demographic character. Emperor Hadrian's decrees had, of course, expropriated lands in the 2nd century, but the arrival of the Muslims greatly accelerated the process and eventually led to the immigration of the Jews and the creation of a new national majority in the country. Until that time, Jews had constituted the majority of the population, and Hebrew was still the dominant language. I'm going to pause there for a moment because we need to pause. Let's pause. As you know, on the Doug Rice Show, we've reviewed history within this time frame. And though Shlomo Sand, the invention of the Jewish people, is doing some, half truth and admittance, what he's saying ain't the same. They're omitting the removal and the lightening of the countryside, but they're telling the truth otherwise, which I find nice. But we learn a lot from what's not said, and this publication is, I believe, well read. So if you do appreciate what we do, I beg of you to please give to the links below so that you can support the Doug Rice Show. We do have a new patron account. It's patreon.com/the Doug Rice Show, but it would be much easier if you just give to our Cash App. Every show almost can be the last show. I don't know, and I'm not just saying so. So please show your support to this effort. And I'm going to get back to this because this is good. I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read this chapter. Yes, facts I'll bring. It is true that there was no deliberate policy of expulsion, but that does not mean that exile was undertaken voluntarily. God forbid. Denur was worried that if it were accepted that the Jews left their country of their own volition, it would undermine their renewed claim to it in modern times. I hope I didn't read that, did I? I hope I didn't, did I? Oh, I did I? He struggled with the grave issue for years, ultimately reaching a more satisfactory historical summary. Oh, no, I didn't read this. Here we go. Every Jewish habitation in the diaspora began with exile. That is, as an outcome of the compulsion and force. This does not mean that the Jews came to most of these countries after the fall of Jerusalem as prisoners of war, fugitives, or deportees. The road from the devastated Jerusalem to their final settlement in any given generation was extended and protracted, with numerous sojourns along the way lasting a long time. But because they arrived as fugitives seeking shelter, and as the fall of their country was famous and its circumstances were known to all, it was natural that people in the countries to which these fugitives came were satisfied with knowing the original circumstances which led them thither. Sometimes the Jews themselves sought to stress the Jewish aspect of their exile by playing down their connection with their previous place of exile and stressing the first or primary cause. And again, no mention of Negro sales, no mention of what they did. I mean, it's interesting. Didn't mean to do that. Wait. Thus, even if the exile following the destruction of the Second Temple was a vague myth, it was justified because it was followed by other expulsions and wanderings. Interesting. The long exile is like a shadow cast by the destruction, hence its chief significance to encompass all future exiles. De Niro willingly accepted the Christian and subsequently anti-Semite myth about the wandering Jew who finds no rest, and therefore defined the Jewish identity not as belonging to a religious minority that lived for centuries among other dominant religious cultures. In other words, not Negroes, sometimes repressive and at other times protective, but mostly Black Negroes and always connected, but as the identifying profile of an alien ethnic national body that has always been on the move and is destined to keep wandering or being sold into slavery, which we have already proved. Only this conception of exile gave an organic sequence to the history of Jewish dispersal. And only in this way could it clarify and justify the return of the nation to its birthplace. In other words, only this justify what we see today. Only this could tell them to get Palestine out of their way. But there's a lot more that Negroes got to say. De Niro gave the secularization of the Jewish exile its strongest and clearest historical expression. It was essentially revolutionary. It altered not only the Jewish time structure of the exile, but also the underlying significance of this religious time. The historian felt its national power vis-a-vis the declining tradition, and although he repeatedly resorted to it, he also turned it inside out. Do you hear that, folks? Have no doubt. As a historian and public intellectual, he replaced thousands of rabbis, those organic intellectuals of the Jewish past, who defined Judaism itself through the conception of exile. He therefore did not scruple to issue a new halakhic decision. The 3 vows of Rabbi Hossein ben Hanina were vows to preserve the exile. They were revoked by the end of the exile, and the vow not to rise up over the wall is likewise null and void. This generation's only answer must be indeed to rise up over the wall. Now, folks, before I take a break and stall, it's a lot trying to pretend to be God's chosen people, huh? It just takes a lot out of you, doesn't it? I mean, they're going through it, aren't they? I mean, had they only just left well enough alone, but you know, prophecy, it's always prone to come true. And so here's me and you looking at them, pretending to be us. And here they got us at the back of the bus. But, you know, on with the show. This bold historian, who became Israel's Minister of Education in 1951, assumed that the power relations between Judaism and Zionism and the state permitted him to pronounce the end of the exile. Wow, he's pronounced the end of the exile. And he was right. The nationalization of religion in Israel was advancing rapidly, and he could claim ideological victory. To round off the description of how the concepts of expulsion and exile were transformed in Zionist historiography in the new homeland, we might consider briefly two more scholars who dealt directly with this issue and contributed much to the development of national consciousness and collective memory in the flourishing Israeli society. Joseph Klausner of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who was in effect the first important historian of the period of the Second Temple, and his colleague, Yezkel Kaufman, author of the important work Gola Venka, Exile and Estrangement. Both received the Israel Prize. It was Klausner who wrote The History of the Second Temple, a work in 5 volumes that was reprinted many times and read by countless readers. The final volume concludes with the events of the Great Revolt, and the renowned scholar lavished praise on the fighters and their national courage. Having described the tragic end of the siege of Masada, he closes with the following words: "Thus ended the great uprising, the most glorious war for liberty in antiquity. The fall of the Second Temple was complete. No self-rule, not even internal autonomy, worthy of the name, remained in Judea. Enslavement, corpses, ruins, such were the sights wherein the second destruction was revealed in all its horror." That is the historical summary, and nothing further is said. Even this nationalistic historian with his right-wing orientation did not dare add expulsion to the destruction of the Second Temple. And thus, to his book's highly dramatic ending, he knew perfectly well that such a description clashed with the fact that 60 years later, another mass uprising broke out within the extensive Judean population that had not been exiled, and that moreover was led by a hero like Bar Kokhba and the heroic warriors of Batar. Therefore, he too, like other Zionist historians, preferred to keep the beginning of the exile in historiographic twilight zone. Well, I'll be damned. Similarly, Kaufman's Exile and Estrangement contains a great deal on exile and nation, but nothing about expulsion. This book is one of the most intriguing attempts to ascribe the Jews' long exile to their being a stubborn, resistant nation rather than simply religious communities. But his meticulous analysis of the Jewish exile avoids touching on the historical circumstances that gave rise to this weird, strange, and scattered community that remained. And he saw it, a people through all the circumstances and adversities. Now, when he speaks of Israel that was exiled from its country and scattered, but that text does not spell out when this happened, how, why, and to where Israel scattered. Now, did you guys read that? Because it really matters. The origin of the exile is taken as known, requiring no detailed explication, despite the book's subtitle, a socio-historical study on the issue of the fate of the nation of Israel from ancient times until the present. Oh, no, they're not going to tell the truth here. No. The action of expulsion, such a central and fundamental event in the history of the Jewish people, should have been studied in scores of investigations, yet amazingly, it has not resulted in a single such work. Y'all hear that? Do you understand that they're trying to fit their square hole in the round peg of negrosity, that they are trying to change the landscape of history? I tried to make something up. They are! And they're not even touching on the subject that needs to be touched. I guess they don't like Negroes too much. Okay, whatever. Next. The historical reality of the expulsion was thus accepted as self-evident, not discussed, never doubted. Every historian knew that the myth combining destruction and expulsion was very much alive in the mind of the public, having derived from religious tradition and becoming firmly rooted in secular consciousness. In the popular discourse, as in the political statements and the educational system. The expulsion of the people of Israel after the fall of the kingdom was carved in stone. Most intelligent scholars evaded this dubious area with professional elegance. Here and there, as though unwittingly, they supplemented their writings with alternative explanations of the prolonged exile. Against its will, the people emigrate from the homeland. One of the main problems bedeviling the myth of destruction, expulsion, was the fact that long before 70 CE, there were large Jewish communities outside Judea. It was widely known that after Cyrus's declaration ending the so-called Babylonian exile, only some of the exiles and their offspring returned to Jerusalem. The rest, possibly the majority, chose to remain and prosper in the cultural centers of the flourishing East, where the elites nurtured rich religious traditions that would spread around the ancient world. It is not too fanciful to state that the first monotheism was to a considerable extent formulated in those regions of exile where these founders of Judaism made their permanent home. The fact that they continued to regard Jerusalem as a sacred center did not contradict their religious thinking. Okay, now wait a minute. We know these are not the people. Once out of Jerusalem, the people have been sold into slavery. We are the people. So these are Europeans doing, again, backflips, Greg Louganis somersaults into empty pools. And they're going to crack their head on the bottom of truth. Oh, that came nicely. Okay. Fact that they continue to regard Jerusalem as a sacred center, right? Later forms of monotheism, such as Christianity and Islam, also had sacred centers that, rather than being magnets for migration, were sites of religious longing and pilgrimage. Perhaps, too, the presence of a permanent mass population in a sacred locale would, in the long run, undermine the beliefs associated with it. For years after Cyrus's decree, the settled rabbinical schools in Sara, Nehardea, and Pambitia were the principal laboratories in which the Jewish religion, and its cult practices were refined. So at this point, you need to keep this in mind. Jews have been now cultivated not into the Negroes they knew, but now into a sect and race of people that resemble their face. This is deep, y'all. I like this. All right, so I like that. Whoops. It seems that the synagogue was born there, and the Babylonian Talmud created there was esteemed more highly than the Jerusalem Talmud, because it had emerged from a more elevated cultural context. No, it had some sick and twisted practices in it. We read about it. Josephus had already noted that there were countless thousands of Jews living in the country of the Parthians. He described two adventurous brothers, Hasani, and Hanani, who in the 1st century CE established near Nehardea a Jewish principality that aimed to rob its neighbors. So now we know who they favored. They ran it for some 15 years until they fell out predictably when Hanani married a beautiful foreign woman. But if the Jewish center in Babylonian was born of an ancient act of expulsion, what was the origin of all the other Jewish communities that kept springing up in the nearby regions of Asia and North Africa, and later spread all around the Mediterranean basin, long before the destruction? Did they too result from expulsion? It begins with the Jewish communities in neighboring Egypt. According to the author of the book Jeremiah, Judeans settled there when the first temple fell, but they soon became idolatrous and were punished by God. Earliest Jewish settlement in Egypt, attested by archaeology, was in Elephantine Island, Yeb in Hebrew, near today's Aswan Dam. It was a military colony of Persian Jews who in the 6th century BCE, built a temple to Yahweh, apparently not as the sole deity. A correspondence in Aramaic from the 5th century BCE has been found. An exchange of letters between the Yeb garrison and the governor Yahab province near Jerusalem, and also with Samaria to its north. It is not known where these soldiers came from or who they were, only that they were Jewish temple, that their Jewish temple was destroyed late in the 5th century. So let's assume they may have been Negroes. Who knew? Who knows? The Big Bang and the birth of Jewish communities in Egypt and the entire eastern end of the Mediterranean occurred when the Persian Empire was brought down by Alexander the Great, and the great Hellenistic world took shape. As the empire's rigid boundaries disintegrated, a tremendous wave of trade and ideas washed over the region, producing a new and open culture. Hellenism spread everywhere, stimulating and giving rise to novel intellectual and religious symbiosis, as well as safer communication. Josephus tells us that following the conquest of Judea and Samaria by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's successors, many captives were taken to Egypt, where they became settled as respected citizens with equal rights. He then adds, there were not a few other Jews who, of their own accord, went into Egypt as invited by the goodness of the soil and by the liberty of Ptolemy. Relations between the two regions grew closer, with merchants, mercenaries, and Judean scholars settling mainly in the new metropolis, Alexandria. Over the next 200 years, the number of Jews in Egypt kept growing, causing the Alexandrian philosopher Philo Judaeus to state early in the 1st century CE, with the exaggeration characteristic of the age, that they numbered 1 million. His estimate was, of course, too high, but it's safe to assume that in his lifetime, there were as many Jews in Egypt as there were in the kingdom of Judea. Now, this almost seems like they're making an excuse and trying to run some play. I'll tell you why. We know at this point in time in history, the lightifying of the population was nearly complete. And the sale of Negroes into slavery, it took its seat. And so the folks that they're talking about proclaiming to be Jews, as they mix the Babylonian worship and use that to build the Talmud, the muddy abomination that they now serve as a fake for a fake Jewish nation, we can believe that as they mix above and beyond their borders, that the folks that we see have been given their orders. They would much rather it be a European face that people see when they associate it with, Hebrews like you and me. What? I had to take a pause and drink some water for the cause. Also, please give. Please support this. I'm not going to stop until you get the gist. I'm going to keep reading because this is what Negroes be needing. Okay, I'll stop at around 2 hours. There were as well quite a few Jewish believers in Cyrenaica, west of Egypt, who also ruled by the Ptolemies, and a good many in Asia Minor ruled by the Seleucids. Josephus mentioned in his Antiquities of the Jews that the Seleucid king of Antiochus III settled in the provinces of Libya and Phrygia 2,000 families of Jewish mercenaries from Babylonia. But how did large communities spring up also in Antioch and Damascus, and later Ephesus, Salamis, Athens, Thessalonica, and Corinth in Europe? Here again, there were no sources to enlighten us. Well, let's enlighten ourselves. A lot of those are Jewish converts. A lot of these people that they are now claiming to be Jews are not even Jews. They're just the name they're used. That's all. But here again, there are no sources to enlighten us, as you said. With the growth of the Roman Empire, the epigraphic record reveals the presence of many Jews in Rome too. Already in 59 BCE, the famous Roman orator Cicero had complained about their number. They must have been Negroes. You know how many numerous that crowd is, how great its unanimity, and of what weight it is in the popular assemblies. Inscriptions could be found in the Roman catacombs, testify to the rich religious life of these Jews and to their economic prosperity. The community in Rome was large, and there were also communities in other Italian cities. In short, just before the fall of the Second Temple, there were Jewish believers all over the Roman Empire, as well as in the Parthian territory in the east, in numbers vastly exceeding those of the inhabitants of Judah. From North Africa to Armenia, from Persia to Rome, there were thriving Jewish communities, primarily in large cities, but also in towns and even villages. Josephus, quoting Strabo, the Greek historian and geographer, wrote, "Now these Jews already gotten into all cities, and it is hard to find a place in the inhabitable earth that hath not admitted this tribe, Phylon of men, and is not possessed by them." Again, we pause for the cause. It's near complete. They've taken our seat, okay? And I don't know if I can take much more of this meat. Oh my goodness, this goes on for too long. And I don't know if my voice is that strong, and it is not. Dear God, this ends on page 160, 170, 130. No, we'll never get done with this show. So I gotta go. It's no big deal. I'm sure you all know how I feel. The invention of the Jewish people in this particular topic is one that I could go on and never drop it. But I do appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed the rhyme. I'm going to revisit once again that you take a look at our sponsor. I'm going to close and open with that. I think it's important. And again, it's Twidware. He will at some point be on the show. When that time will be, well, I don't know. But please visit twidware.com. Take a look at his apparel, buy something, recommend it to, Fred, Gene, and Harold. I'm just joking. I'm a little tired. Still not enough wired. But also have folks that have sports teams. That was a possibility, if you know what I mean. It was a good idea. So put it out there, please. Support the Doug Rice Show. Purchase at twidware.com, just so you know. And again, thank you so much for being here. My name is Doug Rice, and we had a good show. I thought it was good. Now I gotta go. Before I lose my voice, I gotta use it today and try to earn something that might pay. Who knows? I don't know. Thanks so much for your support. Thank you to Trina for saying so long. Thank you, folks, for sticking on strong. All of these are available. These publications and PDFs are available, except the ones that you can get from Amazon.com. I got a lot more that are really, really cool. If you need a list of our available PDFs, the ones that we are confident in giving away, please write to the Doug Rice Show at gmail.com and say what you got to say, because we got bills we got to pay, and I have to pay Detrina, so I really mean it. Cash App is preferred, but Patreon is also good, or so I've heard. All right, 8:48. I started at 7. I feel good. All right. Okay. Hey, folks, have a great Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? Good Lord, it is Wednesday, October 25th. Have a good Wednesday. Remember to visit Twidware. Remember to support this effort so I can still be here. I'm Doug Rice, and I got to go. You have a wonderful day, and thanks for tuning in to the show. Bye-bye. Wait, hold on, folks. Oh, it's been so long. I know that I usually go on strong, but now I got to say, before I send you on your way, if you still got to be in their good graces, no, you don't. You know why? Get that goddamn grin off your faces. You guys have a good day. That's all I got to say.